Hi everyone, the War on Christmas here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for another installment of our 2017 List Week series, where I go over some highlights, musical highlights of the year. And in this video we're talking honorable mentions, albums that were certainly culturally relevant, wanted to mention them, didn't want to leave them out, but didn't quite make my year-end list because I didn't think quality-wise they were quite there, but still these records did make too large of a splash to completely ignore, or were significant enough to me personally to want to mention. Let's kick it off with this Onda Tropico record, BAILE BUCANERO, a highly anticipated follow-up to the Colombian musical supergroup's debut album, which was a huge musical undertaking, like 40 members, so many tracks, like it's a gigantic project. If you love Latin music, if you love Latin jazz, I highly recommend this album. This follow-up though is much more meager in comparison. However, that doesn't mean it isn't enjoyable. It's a little rough around the edges at points, but it still celebrates an amazing breadth of Latin music styles, as well as incorporating elements of reggae and hip-hop this time around pretty well. It has its lulls in the track list, but this is still a very exciting musical project that I hope continues. I hope follows this new album up very soon. Next, I have to shout out this new COLIN STETSON album, All This I Do for Glory. The solo saxophonist is back. He is finding new ways to incorporate some different sounds here and there into his repertoire, but mostly you have, once again, these cycling, hypnotic solo saxophone pieces that make use of his continuous breathing technique. So you kind of get these endless, uninterrupted pieces. However, Colin does have a certain way of writing these pieces, which I think has become pretty apparent. So this record doesn't totally pull out all the stops. It's not chock full of that many surprises. Still though, the writing and performances on this thing are undeniably good. The production is pretty stunning. Like, there's definitely a beautiful vastness to a lot of these pieces. And having an opportunity to listen to one of the most enigmatic and talented saxophone players on the planet right now is always a treat. This new Roger Waters album really surprised me. Like, he's very much at a point in his career where he shouldn't be putting out some of his best stuff, or you would assume that's the case, but this new record of his is truly a great album. I mean, sure, there are many points on this thing where it is very Floydian. It's gonna make you miss like some old school Floyd stuff. It very much kind of eats and breathes that sound. It's not quite as progressive musically, compositionally, as I would have liked. However, the songs are there, Roger's vocals are there, and there is a huge element of social commentary going on in the lyrics and the themes, some of which get pretty dark, pretty morbid. Also, a lot of sound play, a lot of sound collage on this album, which I find pretty interesting too. There are a few songs on the track list that pale in comparison to others, but overall, I think it's a great album. I think it's a great statement on our current social and political climate. Next, this new Paramore album, After Laughter. This record certainly has its shortcomings and its flaws, but nonetheless, this was very much an upset for me this year. I have, like many other people before this album, never been a Paramore fan, never really been that interested in Paramore, but they made a total 180 with this new album, coming through with like a dance rock, a dance pop record that has tight, funky, colorful, fun instrumentals. I hope this is the beginning of a new chapter for Paramore that sees a lot of good albums coming out. Another very good pop record this year, though not that consistent in my opinion, is the new Lorde album. This record certainly had some shortcomings, but you can't really discount this album entirely. It's one of the biggest pop records of the year, and I would say one of the more quality pop records of the year when you consider the field of pop on the whole with the new Taylor Swift album. Like, you could do a lot worse with mainstream pop records this year, you really could. And while I do think there are a few tracks on here where Lorde really kind of gives into pop trends pretty hard, selling her sound kind of short, she has some of her most captivating ballads on this thing, like Liability, one of her best songs ever. And overall, the record is a pretty interesting meditation on youth, fame, partying, just millennial woes in general, I guess. Next, I have to give a shout out to one of the better rap collaborations of the year, and that is the new Offset, 21 Savage, and Metro Boomin project, Without Warning. Like, I did not anticipate that this would be as good as it is. Like, it just kind of comes across like a mixed bag of tracks, so as an album, the flow is just kind of okay, but there's some incredibly dark, trappy, spacey, and hard-hitting tracks on this thing. And for whatever reason, even though Offset and 21 Savage have entirely different rap styles, they meld together pretty well on this thing. Like, they provide some nice contrast from one another. The whole thing is pretty murderous, pretty creepy, pretty cold-blooded, and I'm actually very happy that this came out. Next, I'm shouting out the new Bjork album, Utopia. While this record did, on its face, have some pretty weak tracks on it, conceptually I do find this to be one of Bjork's more interesting albums. It does address a lot of the topics of romance and love and breaking up that her last album did, but in a much more raw sense. Like, it seems like there's no filter on her when it comes to the lyrics on this album. A lot of exposés on this record, a lot of very personal and raw feelings that she's still feeling to this day, revealed. But I also enjoy the musical aesthetic, the compositional concept of this album, with Bjork incorporating all sorts of field recordings of birds and just nature recordings in general. On top of that, we have the wonderful chorus of flutes that plays throughout much of this record. Then the song structures on this album are pretty open, pretty vast, leading to a lot of these songs to feel sort of meditative. I guess from a song quality perspective, it's not one of her most gratifying records. Sometimes the production is a little off, sometimes the tunes aren't quite there because they kind of suffer at the hands of the narrative, but it is easily one of Bjork's most emotionally intense projects. Next, gotta give a shout out to the new Forest Swords album, Compassion. Dug this album quite a bit, even though in retrospect I do think it is maybe a little one-dimensional in vibe, but still I do love the primal, very cerebral and organic electronic music that occurs on this record. It's very open, it's very spacious. I do wish it brought more variety to the table, but still it was one of the more interesting electronic music listens I've had this year. Next on my list, I have to give a shout out to a record that unfortunately is not going to be making it onto my year-end list because of extraneous issues, personal issues here, but still I can come on here in my honorable mentions video and tell you guys that this record, this new Vega album, It, has easily been one of the most intense, insane, and incredible listening experiences I've had all year. Like, this album is pretty fantastic, and it's a posthumous record as well. Vega, if you didn't know, is a synth-punk pioneer known for fronting the band Suicide, and this record of his final album, is really up there with David Bowie's Black Star and the new Sharon Jones album as far as albums that sort of center around the passing of the artist creating art. Like, this record is so noisy, it's so fantastically performed. Vega's vocals on this thing, he sounds like a demon that smokes too much. The lyrics are pretty minimal and morbid and despondent. The instrumentals are redundant but have a very raw, noisy, industrial feel, and there's really a sense of place to these instrumentals. Like, each instrumental is like a weird, hypnotic, sonic torture chamber that Alan sort of performs these shouted word poetry slam vocals in. Hopefully what I'm saying about this album is kind of selling it, because I do truly think this is the best project on this entire honorable mentions list, and certainly worth a listen, certainly worth your time if you are into experimental music, if you are a Suicide fan. R.I.P. Vega. The man has an incredible and a fantastic musical legacy, and this record is an amazing closing chapter to that, so there you go. Okay, so this final record on my honorable mentions list, it's a controversial one. It's a hip-hop record. A lot of people got mad at me because I gave this thing a 7. Some people saying, Anthony, why would you give that project a 7? I mean, my score on this thing kind of became a little bit of a meme, upset quite a few people, but, you know, this dude has just been having an incredible year, a huge year. I mean, he's really kind of changing the game and making a lot of waves. So I had to mention him in this list, of course. The cultural significance, the impact of this project could not go unacknowledged. Of course, I'm talking about Lil Pump. Lil Pump. Zishin, have you given these albums a listen? Did you love them? Did you hate them? What would you rate them? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Just leave a thoughtful comment down in the comments if you're feeling thoughtful and you want to start a discussion. Make a new friend. I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure I'm in focus here. I'll see you in the next video. List week forever. The needle drop forever. You forever. I love you, forever.